Hey, what's going on guys, and welcome to my second NH guide. If you're a new PKer and haven't already seen the first video, I highly recommend you check it out before continuing with this one, because in this video, I'll be exposing many of the tips and tricks PKers use to get an edge in PvP. And again, to keep this video as short as possible, I'm not going to be explaining the terminology, so if you get lost, be sure to pause the video for the notes that I'll leave on screen, and be sure to read the description for any more details. Now let's get right into the video. Before I actually get into the video, I just want to quickly say thank you guys for all the support from the last guide. I want you guys to know it really means a lot, and hopefully these guides can be my way of showing my appreciation for all the support. And with that being said, I also want to explain that NH pking is heavily scenario based. There are too many what if situations to go over in one video, so this guide will focus on the most important aspects when actually pking without overwhelming you with too much at once. So the first thing we'll go over is how to survive. Not dying is the most important thing when PKing in any style. Like I said in the last video, nothing else matters if your HP hits 0. No amount of DPS is worth risking low HP. In today's era of PKing, the standard is bringing anywhere from 8 to 10 brews, with 4 fish for combo eats. Now, a very common issue that a lot of new PKers struggle with is HP management. And the trick experienced PKers use for this is called the Bolt brew. It's exactly how it sounds. When your HP gets anywhere below 85, you bolt and brew until your HP is at 100 again. For every 3 times you sip a Sarah brew, you want to sip a restore after. This is one of the most important mechanics to utilize when actually getting out there. So to practice this, you can find a good PKer and ask them for a fight without TB. You can easily find a good PKer in these locations that I'll put on screen if you want to pause the video. And another important thing to learn is when you should leave a fight and how to escape when you're TB'd. Like I said in the beginning, there are too many what if scenarios to go over without making this video an hour long. So I'm going to do my best to briefly explain this part without getting into too much overwhelming details. You want to at least give yourself 3 brews to escape. This will give you around 200 damage to catch a freeze log. To catch a freeze log, you must be close to a wall or a tree, and timing is extremely important. After taking damage, you must wait exactly 9.6 seconds before you can log out. There's also a strange mechanic where fully logging out is faster than hopping world as shown here in this clip. Freeze logging is very situational, but the key is to time a freeze right before your own freeze expires. In the final 5 seconds before you're unfrozen, you'll typically have 2 to 3 chances to secure a freeze log before your opponent can refreeze you. So catching a freeze at the final 5 seconds of your own freeze will give you enough time to stand behind a wall or a tree and log out. And remember, you're not guaranteed to catch these freezes. That's why you want to give yourself at least 3 full brews to escape if you get unlucky. The next thing I'll go over is how to not get KO'd. If you're not confident with your prayer switches, I'd recommend camping protect for melee whenever your opponent is in a position to melee you. Keep it on until you catch a freeze and create some distance. You can afford to tank a few ranged or magic hits off prayer, but you won't survive a 30-30 Gmaul or DDS stack. After catching a freeze and gaining distance, the fight becomes much simpler. Just switch between magic and range prayers until the 15-second freeze ends. But before that freeze ends, make sure your HP is high enough to the point where you'll be able to go for a refreeze without brewing yourself down. And remember, don't overstay. If you're clearly losing the fight and you've already used 100% of your special attack, start looking for an escape. This is especially important if your opponent has a gear or stat advantage, because with all the recent updates, players can deal a huge amount of damage in a very short amount of time.
Whoa. What the fuck? What the fuck?
Now let's talk about inventory setups, preferences, and filters. Every PKer has their own playstyle, and the best setup is ultimately the one you're most comfortable with. However, certain settings and layouts can improve efficiency and make your switches and overall gameplay much smoother. So while there isn't a single correct setup, there are definitely ways to optimize your performance. One of these preferences is whether you're a top, middle, or bottom switcher. All that means is where your gear is positioned in your inventory. And I won't spend too much time on the basics like keeping your gear on the left side to minimize mouse movement and re-click your opponent faster. I'll assume all of you know that already. There are also filters that'll let you rearrange your spellbook and prayers. Like most things we've covered, this is just preference. My recommendation is finding a setup that feels comfortable and stick with it while you're learning. And once you're more comfortable with NHing, you can start experimenting with different layouts and settings and see what works best for you. And as one of the only players who PKs on full screen, I don't want to recommend specific settings, since what works for me might not work for you. Now let's take a look at this clip and go through it step by step. Here, I get TP'd by an opponent with a significant gear and stat advantage. And because I'm at such a disadvantage, I've already committed to escaping. With a full inventory of food, all I need to do is avoid getting KO'd long enough to escape. Since we both got frozen at the same time, my only concern right now is using the magic or ranged prey until the freeze ends. But once that freeze timer ends, I want to be at full HP so I can go for a refreeze without needing to brew and lower my stats. However, it's still important to deal damage while you're escaping. A player who's fighting back is much harder to kill than somebody who's only focused on surviving. Your goal isn't necessarily to get the kill. It's to do enough damage to force your opponent to brew and lower their stats. That way, you're not taking hits from somebody who's fully potted the entire fight. Now, right here, I'm waiting for him to go for a spec. This part is situational, because at any time, I could have attempted to catch a freeze log. But to catch a freeze, I wouldn't be able to react if he used a Gmaul. I wouldn't have enough time to switch prayers or eat if I went for a freeze. So with that being said, it's safest to go for a freeze when you have enough distance to where they can't melee you. And like I mentioned before, freezes aren't guaranteed, especially against opponents who have high magic defense. But now that I'm ready to leave, I've positioned myself for a freeze log. Notice how I'm using the bulk brew mechanic that I mentioned earlier to keep pressure on him. Then, just as my entangle ends, I'm able to catch a freeze and log out. And to finish off this guide, I'll be going over some general tips and concepts that will help you make better decisions while PvPing. When a fight starts, one of the first things you should check for is recoil damage. If you're taking recoil damage, your opponent is either using recoils or the Ring of Suffering. This is important because the Suffering provides unlimited recoil damage, which can add up quickly over the course of a fight. It also gives a significant magic defense bonus, making you more likely to splash a mage hit. Every splash is potential damage you're missing out on, and over time, that lost damage can make the difference between winning and losing a fight. And another thing to keep in mind is that you generally want to be the first person to gain momentum in a fight. Sometimes the best thing you can do is send an early special attack. This can give you a strong start and early momentum, which will make the fight a lot easier for you. So far in this clip, I've spec'd 3 times with the DDS and he's only spec'd once. If you take a look at the tracker, you might think I'm winning, but in reality, I only have 25% special attack, while he has 75%. And if he's able to get those other 3 special attacks off on me, he could easily bring back the fight in his favor. And with that in mind, if you're out of special attacks, there's usually no reason to stay within melee distance. Once you've used your spec, focus on keeping your opponent frozen and away from you so they don't get an opportunity to spec you back. A lot of players get desperate and overstay in fights because they haven't used their spec yet. And even if they spec you early in the fight, if you weren't getting hit by recoil damage, just assume they have a life barrier and they're back at 100% spec again. Like I said in the last video, always play as if somebody has a Gmaul that will 30-30 you if you're not prepared. The next thing I'll quickly go over is how to spot a clienter. A clienter is just a fancy word for cheater, but there are many different kinds of way people will client. The 2 main things to watch out for are auto prayers, as shown here in this clip, and spec clients. To spot a prayer clienter is extremely simple. Just flick back and forth between 2 different combat styles and see if they switch. I don't recommend fighting any clienter unless you're an experienced pker, so I won't be giving any advice on how to kill them in this video. Another extremely easy mechanic all pkers use is the fakie, and I don't think I need to explain this one to you guys, but this comes in all forms. Fakie a melee hit to get a free bolt, fakie a melee hit to catch a full TB, or you can fakie mage to get a free melee hit. The possibilities are endless, but don't overwhelm yourself with doing too much. The whole idea of the fakie is to be unpredictable and to condition your opponent to behave a certain way during the fight. Now for those of you who struggle with your clicks, here is a general rule of thumb. The more you spam click, the more likely you are to misclick. And you want to rearrange your camera in a way where your opponent is standing close to your inventory to minimize mouse movement. When fighting another PKer, you want to be moving whenever you're unfrozen. Whether you're getting close, creating distance, or changing directions, the goal is to make the movement unpredictable and increase the chances of your opponent misclicking. It's a lot easier to PK someone who's standing still than somebody who's constantly moving. Movement makes you harder to click and forces your opponent to adjust their camera. This is just another subtle way of applying pressure. And to wrap up this guide, I'll quickly go over a few things I didn't get a chance to cover. There are many different account builds that you'll run into in the wilderness. I'll put a brief description of each one on screen, so feel free to pause the video and have a look. But I wanted to make this a universal guide so the tips can apply to any bracket. However, every bracket has its own metas and playstyle. And one thing I do want to mention is that if you're a main PKer or any build with access to tank gear, you should prioritize wearing that tank gear throughout the fight whenever possible. The defensive bonuses make a huge difference over time and can significantly increase your survivability. And as a very underground, low-tier content creator, I get to talk to some of you guys on a personal level, and I can hear where the struggles are. But you don't need to have the fastest clicks to be a good PKer. PKing is often more about knowledge and decision making than how fast you can click. A lot of these concepts in this guide are things players don't learn until they've spent years in the wilderness. And thank you guys again for all the love and support. So until next time, take care.